I was making coffee when my phone buzzed with a voicemail from my mom. Her voice was cold. "You're cut off. Don't contact us again. We're moving forward without you." I listened twice, then replied with one word. "Okay." That single word ended 30 years of control. 48 hours later, my phone showed 52 missed calls and a message from their lawyer saying they had a serious problem. Before we start, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If family drama stories fascinate you, hit like, subscribe, and stay with me because what happened next changed everything. To understand why that one word, okay, meant so much, you need to understand my family. On the outside, we looked like a normal upper-middle-class American family. Nice neighborhood, decent cars in the driveway. Holiday photos where everyone smiled just enough to look believable. But inside the house, everything ran on one system. My mom, her name is Linda, and she's the kind of person who believes control equals love. If she could manage every decision, every dollar, every relationship, then everything would be safe, at least in her mind. My dad, Richard, was the opposite. Quiet, careful. The type of man who rarely argued and almost never disagreed with my mom in public. If Linda said something, Richard would usually nod like it made perfect sense even, when it clearly didn't. Then there was my younger brother, Daniel. Daniel was the golden child. He could do no wrong. If Daniel made a mistake, it was a learning experience. If I made a mistake, it was proof that I was difficult. I learned that difference pretty early. Now here's the part that made everything complicated. Our family also ran a small real estate investment business together. Nothing huge, just a few rental properties, some flips, and occasional bigger deals when my parents felt confident enough to take the risk. And for years, I worked inside that system, not as the favorite child, not as the decision maker, but as the person who actually kept everything running. I handled the financial spreadsheets. I tracked payments. I reviewed contracts. I communicated with banks, escrow agents, and lawyers. Basically, if a deal moved from idea to reality, I was usually the one making sure the paperwork didn't collapse somewhere in the middle. The funny thing was, nobody in my family ever said that out loud officially. My mom was the boss, Daniel was the future of the business, and me. I was just the daughter who liked numbers. But numbers have a way of quietly holding everything together, and I understood the systems better than anyone else: the bank accounts, the LLC structures, the authorization chains, the escrow requirements. All the invisible details most people ignore until something breaks, which is why the voicemail my mom left that morning wasn't actually new. She had cut me off before, a few times. Actually, usually during some family argument where she wanted to prove a point. She'd say things like, "You're done here. Maybe you should just go live your own life. Don't expect help from this family anymore." And a few days later, things would quietly go back to normal, because eventually someone needed something, a document, a number, a password, a call with the bank, and somehow I'd always get pulled back into the system. But this time felt different. Maybe it was the tone of her voice, maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was because the argument that led to that voicemail had been bigger than anything before. It a lot bigger. It had happened just 2 nights earlier, around the dining room table, and it was about a deal, not just any deal, a $4 million house purchase my parents were absolutely convinced would be their biggest investment. Yet, and from the moment I saw the paperwork, I knew something was wrong. That was the night everything started falling apart, and the night my family decided they were perfectly fine moving forward without me, at least. That's what they thought, until 2 days later, when their phones started blowing up and suddenly everyone needed to talk to Sophia again. The argument that led to my mom's voicemail happened 2 nights earlier. Around the dining room table in my parents' house, it started like most of our business discussions did: my mom talking, Daniel agreeing with everything she said, and my dad quietly listening while pretending to read numbers on a printed sheet. In the middle of the table sat a stack of documents: purchase agreement, inspection report, financing summary. The deal: a $4 million house just outside the city, big property, large lot. My mom was convinced it would be the best flip they'd ever done. "We're getting it under market value," she said, tapping the contract with her fingernail. "This is exactly the kind of opportunity we've been waiting for." Daniel nodded immediately. "Yeah, it's a great deal," he said. "Once we renovate, we could probably sell for $5 million. I had been quiet the whole time, flipping through the pages slowly because the numbers weren't what bothered me. It was the structure of the contract. There were clauses buried inside the financing agreement, clauses that made the entire transaction more fragile than my parents seemed to realize. I finally looked up. "Did you notice the conditional escrow timeline?" I asked. My mom frowned like I'd just interrupted something important. "What about it?" "It's tied to a specific authorization chain," I said. "If any of the approvals break, the deal automatically collapses. Daniel waved his hand dismissively. That's normal. Not this one. I replied calmly. I slid one of the pages across the table. This escrow requires final authorization from the financial operator listed in the LLC records. My mom crossed her arms. So I looked directly at her. That's me. The room went quiet for a moment. Not because it was surprising everyone in that room knew I was the one handling those systems, but my mom didn't like the implication. You're overthinking this, she said. We've done deals like this before. Not structured like this, I said. Daniel leaned forward, clearly annoyed. Why do you always do this? He asked. Do what? Act like you're the only one who understands anything. I took a slow breath. I'm not saying the deal is impossible, I said. I'm saying it has a weak point. My mom's voice sharpened. And what exactly is that weak point? I held up the document. If the financial authorization gets interrupted before closing, escrow shuts down automatically. The contract cancels. My mom rolled her eyes. That's not going to happen. But it could. I said, and that was the moment the conversation turned because my mom didn't hear concern. She heard challenge. You always think you're smarter than everyone. She snapped. That's not what I said. Daniel shook his head. No. Mom's right, he said. Sophia does this every time. She acts like the rest of us are idiots. I stared at him. I'm trying to prevent a problem. You're trying to control everything. Daniel shot back. My dad shifted in his chair, but still didn't speak. That part didn't surprise me. He rarely did. My mom leaned forward. You know what your problem is? She said. You don't trust this family. I almost laughed. I built half the systems this family uses. That's not the point, she snapped. So what is the point? Her voice dropped to that cold tone I knew too well. The point is, we're doing this deal. Whether you approve of it or not, I looked down at the contract again. The numbers were fine. The property was fine. But the structure? That fragile little clause buried inside escrow? It was a disaster waiting to happen. I'm not stopping you, I said quietly. Good, my mom replied immediately. But I'm telling you, the risk is real. Daniel slammed his hand lightly on the table. God. Sophia, not everything has to be a lecture. I stood up from the table. That's when my mom said it. If you can't support this family, maybe you shouldn't be part of it. The room went silent. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I nodded slowly. Maybe you're right. I grabbed my bag and walked toward the door behind me. Daniel muttered something under his breath. My dad still didn't say a word, and my mom, she didn't stop me. The front door closed behind me with a soft click. 2 nights later, my phone buzzed with a voicemail. You're cut off. Don't contact us again. We're moving forward without you. And for the first time in my life, I decided to let them try after I sent that one-word reply. Okay, I expected to feel something dramatic. Anger, sadness, maybe even relief. But honestly, I just felt calm. For most of my life, every conflict in my family followed the same pattern. My mom would say something extreme. Daniel would back her up. My dad would stay quiet. And somehow I'd end up fixing whatever mess came next. It was like gravity, everything eventually pulled back toward me. But this time, something in my head shifted. If they wanted to move forward without me, I was going to let them fully. No arguments. No dramatic speeches. No trying to prove I was right, just distance. I put my phone down on the kitchen counter and finished making my coffee like nothing had happened. Outside my apartment window, the city looked exactly the same as it had the day before. Cars moving, people walking dogs, a delivery truck blocking half the street while someone argued with the driver. Life kept going, which felt strangely fitting because that's exactly what my mom said she wanted, moving forward without me. So I started doing something I had never really done before. I started untangling myself from the family business, not in a dramatic way. I didn't log in and destroy files. I didn't delete anything. I didn't sabotage a single document. I just stepped back for years. I had been the one maintaining the structure. Behind our deals, I knew where everything lived. The bank, portals, the escrow platforms, the LLC filings, the authorization lists. Half of those systems were connected through me not because I demanded it, but because someone had to organize the chaos when my parents bought new properties. I registered the companies when accounts needed access updates. I handled the forms. When lawyers requested documentation. I gathered everything and sent it. None of it was glamorous, but all of it mattered. So that morning, I opened my laptop and started reviewing everything. I was still attached to bank access document portals, shared drives, legal correspondence accounts, anywhere. My name appeared as an active operator. I began quietly stepping away in some systems. It was simple. Click, remove user in others. It required sending a request. Please transfer administrative responsibility to another authorized member. No explanations. No emotional messages, just clean exits by lunchtime. I had removed myself from 3 different internal systems connected to the family company. It felt strange watching those little confirmation messages pop up. Access. Removed authorization updated. User permissions. Changed. Each one felt like cutting a small invisible thread for years. Those threads had tied me to everything my family did, every deal, every document, every transaction. Now they were disappearing one by one. And the funny thing was, I wasn't angry while doing it. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. In fact, I made sure not to do anything that could be interpreted as sabotage. I didn't delete records, I didn't lock files. I didn't interfere with the house deal we had argued about. Everything stayed exactly where it was. I simply stopped being the person holding the structure together. By the time evening rolled around, I closed my laptop and leaned back on my couch. My phone stayed silent. No calls from my mom. No messages from Daniel. No awkward text from my dad asking if we could talk things out. Nothing, which was honestly what I expected. Because in my family, silence usually meant someone believed they had one. And my mom probably believed exactly that. She had said the words, "You're cut off," in her mind. That meant the situation was finished, control restored, the problem removed. What she didn't realize yet was something much simpler for the first time. I wasn't waiting to be pulled back in. I was actually gone. And somewhere across the city, my parents and brother were still preparing to close on that $4 million house. They were so excited about the inspections had passed, the financing was lined up, escrow was moving forward. Everything probably looked perfect from their side, which made the next part almost funny because 2 days later, something very small changed inside their system. And when it did, the first message didn't come from my mom. It came from a bank notification, account access locked. That's when things started getting interesting. To understand why things unraveled so quickly after I stepped away, you have to understand the house deal. My family was so excited about. It wasn't just another small property flip. This one was big, a $4 million house on the edge of a fast-growing suburb about 40 minutes outside the city. The kind of place real estate agents describe with words like exclusive, rare opportunity, and future appreciation potential. 3 stories, large backyard, an aging but impressive structure that looked like it had once belonged to someone important. My mom saw it as the perfect investment. Her plan was simple: buy the property slightly under market value, renovate it, then sell it a year later for a profit that could push our small family business into a completely different level. And honestly, the idea itself wasn't terrible. The location was solid. The neighborhood was growing fast. Houses nearby had sold for even more than the purchase price. The risk wasn't the property. The risk was how the deal was structured. Real estate transactions that big almost never happen in a simple way. There are layers of systems behind the scenes that most buyers never see. First, there was the LLC structure. Instead of buying the property personally, my parents had created a limited liability company to hold the asset. That's normal for investors. It protects personal finances if something goes wrong. Then there was the financing agreement. Part of the purchase was funded through a bank loan, which meant the bank had its own list of requirements, paperwork, verification steps, identity confirmations, and then there was the most important system in the entire process. Escrow. Escrow is basically the neutral middleman that holds money, documents, and approvals while a deal moves toward closing. When everything checks out, escrow releases the funds and the property officially changes hands. But escrow doesn't move on trust, it moves on authorization chains. Specific people are listed in the system as the ones allowed to approve certain steps. Financial operators. Legal representatives, authorized signers. In our case, the company purchasing the house had an operating structure with 3 names listed for different roles. My mom, my dad, and me, not because my parents wanted it that way, but because when the company was created, I had been the one handling the paperwork, and the bank required someone responsible for financial operations and compliance confirmations, so my name went into the system. Once it's there, changing it isn't always instant. It requires forms, reviews, processing time. Normally, that's not a problem because nobody plans to remove the person managing the system in the middle of a deal, except that's exactly what my mom had decided to do when she sent that voicemail saying I was cut off. She probably imagined something emotional. Maybe she thought I'd call back, apologize, and fall back into my usual role. Maybe she assumed nothing in the business would actually change, but businesses don't run on emotions, they run on processes. And those processes had a very specific design. The escrow timeline for that house had several stages: initial deposit, inspection period, loan, confirmation. Final authorization. That final authorization step required confirmation from the financial operator listed in the company records, which was still me, even though my family had decided they were perfectly capable of moving forward without me. Now here's the detail nobody in my family had really paid attention to. Escrow timelines are strict. If certain steps are not completed on time, the system doesn't pause and ask what happened, it just closes the transaction automatically. That's not personal, that's just how contracts work. And somewhere inside that process, a small invisible gap had just appeared. Because when I removed myself from the internal systems and stopped acting as the financial operator, the chain of authorization quietly broke. Nobody noticed it at first. The house still looked like it was moving toward closing. Emails were still arriving. Documents were still being processed. Everything probably felt completely normal until the moment one final confirmation was required. And the system tried to send that request to the person responsible for approving it, which was supposed to be me, except by that point, I was no longer connected to any of it, and that's when the first small problem appeared: a message inside the bank's internal system. Simple. Automatic. Completely unemotional. Authorization unavailable. At that exact moment, my family probably still believed they had everything under control. The deal was moving forward. The property was almost theirs. They had cut me out of the picture, and in their minds, nothing important had changed, but behind the scenes, something critical had already started to unravel, because when a system depends on one specific link, and that link quietly disappears, everything connected to it eventually stops moving. It just takes a little time before anyone notices. In this case, it took about 2 days, and when my family finally realized what had happened, my phone suddenly looked very different than it had the night before, because the quiet silence that followed my mom's voicemail was about to turn into absolute chaos. 2 days after my mom left that voicemail, I woke up to a notification on my phone. Not a call, not a message, an email. The subject line was short and technical. The kind most people ignore without even opening account access update. For a second, I thought it was just another automated message from one of the many financial systems connected to the family business. I had been removing myself from several platforms the day before, so notifications like that weren't unusual still. Curiosity made me tap the email. Inside was a simple confirmation: by access to one of the company's primary banking portals had been officially revoked. Your user permissions have been removed from the following account. Below that was the company name, the LLC that was purchasing the $4 million house. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen for a moment. Then I laughed, not because it was shocking, because it was predictable. At some point after my mom sent that voicemail, someone in the family had obviously decided to make things official. If I was cut off, then removing my access to the financial accounts was probably the next logical step in their minds. It was the kind of move that feels powerful. When you're the one clicking the button, access revoked, problem solved. Except it doesn't actually work that way, because financial systems don't just care about who can log in, they care about who is registered in the authorization records, and those are two very different things. The login access they removed was just the user interface, the front door, but the deeper layer, the legal authorization connected to the escrow process, was still built around my name, which meant that while I could no longer open the account dashboard and look at balances, the bank still recognized me as the financial operator responsible for final transaction approvals. In other words, the system still expected my confirmation when it came time to close the deal. I knew that, but my family probably did in single quotes, because from their perspective, removing my access likely felt like tying up a loose end. Now they could move forward with the house purchase without worrying about me interfering. I pictured my mom sitting at her computer, satisfied, Daniel probably standing behind her, saying something like, "Yeah, that's better. Now she can't mess with anything," and my dad quietly watching, not questioning whether that decision might cause other complications. It almost made me smile, not because I wanted them to fail, but because the entire situation showed exactly how differently we understood the systems we were dealing with for them. The business was about decisions. Buy this house, sell that property, take this loan. But for me, the business had always been about structure, accounts, authorizations, contracts, invisible rules that determine whether a deal actually happens. And those rules don't change. Just because someone is angry, I closed the email and set my phone down. If my family thought removing my login meant I was completely out of the picture, They were about to learn something important. Real estate transactions don't just rely on enthusiasm and confidence. They rely on processes. And those processes had already started moving toward a moment that required one very specific thing: final authorization, which, according to the system, still belonged to me. The strange part was that I didn't even know exactly when that step would trigger. Escrow timelines can shift depending on inspections, bank confirmations, and document processing. Sometimes it happens in a week, sometimes in a few days, but I knew one thing for sure. If that authorization request appeared and no one could complete it, the entire deal would freeze, and if the deadline passed after that, the contract could collapse completely. Still, I wasn't worried about it because none of that was my responsibility. Anymore, my mom had been very clear: don't contact us again. So I didn't. I spent the rest of that morning working on freelance projects, answering emails for clients who actually paid me for my time. By afternoon, I went for a walk through a nearby park, enjoying the kind of quiet that rarely existed when I was tangled up in family business. Drama. The sky was clear, kids were playing near a fountain. Someone nearby was arguing with their dog about a tennis ball. Normal life. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about contracts or escrow deadlines or loan approvals. I was just living my own day, which is probably why I didn't check my phone again until late that evening when I finally picked it up from the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with several notifications. Not dozens, just a few. 3 missed calls, all from the same number. My mom. I stared at them for a second. Then I set the phone back down because I already knew how that conversation would go. She'd start with anger, then confusion, then accusations, and eventually, somehow, the entire situation would become my fault. So instead of calling back, I finished making dinner and turned on a movie. The phone buzzed again, once, then twice, then stopped for the rest of the night. Everything stayed quiet. But somewhere across the city, something inside that $4 million house deal had just reached the step everyone had been waiting for. Escrow had completed inspections. The bank had confirmed the financing. The final document package had been prepared. All that remained was the last approval in the authorization chain: a digital confirmation from the financial operator listed in the company records. The system sent the request automatically. It waited and waited, but no confirmation ever came, because the person responsible for approving it was no longer part of the system. And when the deadline timer inside escrow reached 0, the platform followed the instructions written inside the contract. No authorization, no closing. Transaction terminated. Property released back to the seller. Just like that, a $4 million deal disappeared, and somewhere inside my parents' house, someone finally realized something had gone very, very wrong. Which is why the next morning when I woke up and picked up my phone, the number on my screen wasn't 3 missed calls anymore. It was 50-2. The strange thing about chaos is that it usually starts with silence. For 2 full days after my mom left that voicemail, nothing happened. No angry texts, no dramatic phone calls, no sudden attempts at reconciliation, just quiet. And honestly, that quiet felt almost unreal. For years, my life had revolved around reacting to whatever crisis was happening inside the family business. A late-night call about a tenant issue, a frantic message about a bank transfer, my mom needing help understanding a contract 5 minutes before a deadline. But suddenly, none of that existed anymore. My phone stayed still on the kitchen counter. No alerts, no requests, no stress, no stress. I spent those 2 days doing something that felt strangely unfamiliar. I lived a normal life. The morning after the voicemail, I woke up without an alarm and made coffee in my tiny apartment kitchen. Sunlight was spilling through the window onto the floor. And for once, I didn't feel like I was already behind on 10 different responsibilities. I opened my laptop and worked on a freelance bookkeeping project for a small design studio. I had started helping a few months earlier. The owner paid on time, respected my boundaries, and never expected me to solve problems that weren't mine. It felt healthy. Around noon, I walked down the street to a cafe I liked. The barista knew my order by heartist latte. Light ice, and asked how my week was going. Pretty calm, I said. And for once, that answer was actually true. That afternoon, I sat by the window watching people move through their day. Someone walking their dog, a couple arguing quietly over directions on a phone, a delivery driver struggling to park in a space that was clearly too small. Normal life, the kind of life that doesn't revolve around family power struggles and $4 million house deals. For a moment, I wondered what my parents were doing. Maybe celebrating the upcoming closing, maybe planning renovation ideas. My mom loved imagining how a property would look after she transformed it. Daniel probably believed this investment would prove he was finally ready to take over more responsibility in the business. And my dad? He was probably doing what he always did, trying not to rock the boat. The thought crossed my mind that maybe they really had moved forward without me. Maybe they had already figured out how to replace everything I used to manage. Maybe the deal was still moving perfectly toward closing. But the longer I sat with that idea, the more I knew it probably wasn't true. Not because my family was incompetent, but because systems don't adjust instantly. They require updates, paperwork, approvals, and time. Removing someone from a business structure usually takes days or weeks before every system reflects that change, which meant somewhere inside the process behind that house deal, my name probably still existed, still attached to something important. But again, that wasn't my problem anymore. That evening, I went home, cooked pasta, and watched an old movie on my couch. My phone remained quiet the entire night. When I went to bed, I placed it on the nightstand without even thinking about it the next morning. Sunlight woke me before my alarm. I reached over, picked up my phone, and glanced at the screen. For a second, my brain didn't process what I was seeing. The notification bar was packed with icons, missed call alerts, stacked on top of each other like a vertical wall. I blinked, unlocked the phone, and stared. 52 missed calls, every single one from the same three people: Mom, Dad, Daniel. Some calls were only minutes apart. Others looked like they came in rapid bursts: 3, 4, 5 attempts within the same hour. My mom alone had called 27 times. I scrolled through the list. Slowly, the timestamps told a story. The first few calls had started late the night before, then more around midnight, then a cluster early that morning. Something had clearly happened, something big enough to push my entire family into a panic, and suddenly, that calm quiet I'd enjoyed for 2 days felt like the peaceful moment right before a storm hits. Because families like mine don't make 52 phone calls unless they believe the situation is urgent, or expensive, or both. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Part of me already knew what the problem was, not because anyone had explained it, but because I understood exactly how fragile that house deal had been. There was only one moment in the process that could cause this kind of reaction. The final authorization step, the one that required confirmation from the financial operator, the one tied to my name. If that step failed, escrow would shut the entire deal down automatically, which meant one thing. Somewhere in the past 12 hours, my family had probably received an email from escrow, something short, something official, something devastating. Transaction canceled. Now they were calling the one person who had warned them about that exact risk. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through the missed calls. There were also several text messages, all from my mom, all increasingly frantic. But before I could read them, another notification appeared at the top of the screen. A new message. This one from a number I didn't recognize, and the sender wasn't my family, it was their lawyer. The message was short, professional, and slightly urgent. We need to speak with you immediately. There is a serious problem regarding the escrow transaction. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then I leaned back against my pillow and let out a slow breath. Because now everything made perfect sense. The system had reached the point where my confirmation was required, and when it didn't appear, the entire deal had collapsed. A $4 million property gone. Just like that, not because anyone sabotaged it, not because something illegal happened, simply because the person responsible for the final authorization was no longer there. And suddenly the family who had told me they were perfectly happy moving forward without me was desperately trying to reach me again. But the part that made the situation almost unbelievable was this. For the first time in my life, I wasn't in a hurry to answer. Instead, I opened the lawyer's message and typed a reply. 5 words. Calm, simple, and maybe just a little bit satisfying. Enjoy moving forward. Then I set the phone back down on the nightstand. Because something told me the panic on the other side of that situation was only just beginning, and the next few hours were about to get very interesting. After I sent that reply to the lawyer, enjoy moving forward, I placed my phone face down on the nightstand and sat there for a moment. The room was quiet outside. A car passed slowly down the street. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's dog barked once, then stopped. Normal sounds, normal life. But I knew that somewhere across the city, things probably didn't feel normal at all, because if the escrow cancellation had happened the way I suspected, my family wasn't just dealing with a failed deal. They were dealing with consequences they hadn't fully understood when they decided to cut me out. The first text from my mom appeared about 10 minutes after I sent the message, then another then another. My phone buzzed repeatedly on the nightstand until I finally picked it up and looked at the screen. Her messages were very different from the voicemail she left 2 days earlier. The cold confidence was gone. In its place was urgency. Sophia, we need to talk. Please call me. This situation is serious. A few minutes later, another message appeared, this one longer. We didn't realize the escrow approval required you specifically. The lawyer says there might still be a way to fix this if we move. Quickly, I stared at the text. For a while, not because I didn't understand the situation, but because I understood it perfectly when the escrow process shut down. It didn't just cancel the purchase, it triggered other clauses inside the contract, deadlines, penalties, and the one my family was probably most worried about right now, the deposit. In large real estate deals, buyers usually place a significant amount of money into escrow as a show of good faith. In this case, the deposit had been around $400,000. If the buyer fails to complete the transaction under certain conditions, that money can legally transfer to the seller just like that. No refund, no second chance. I didn't know if that had happened yet, but judging by the number of phone calls my family had made, they were probably terrified it would. Another message from Daniel appeared. Hey Soph, look, things got complicated. Can you just call us? That was new. Daniel almost never reached out. First, especially not with that tone. Then my dad called again. The phone rang in my hand for several seconds. For a moment I considered answering, but then I remembered the voice message. My mom had left. You're cut off. Don't contact us again. We're moving forward without you. So I let the call ring until it stopped. And for the first time, I realized something important. My family hadn't actually missed me. They missed what I did for them. The systems. The approvals. The quiet work that made their decisions possible, and now that those systems had collapsed, they were suddenly remembering how valuable that invisible work had been. About 20 minutes later, another message came from the lawyer. Sophia, we are attempting to reopen communication with escrow and the bank. Your confirmation may still allow the transaction to be restored if processed immediately. I read the message slowly. Then I looked around my apartment. My small kitchen, my laptop on the table, the quiet space that had felt peaceful for the past 2 days. For the first time in years, my life wasn't tied to the chaos of my family's decisions, and the strange thing was, I liked it a lot. So instead of rushing to fix their problem, I did something much simpler. I made another cup of coffee. I sat by the window and I thought about the last conversation I had with my mom. If you can't support this family, maybe you shouldn't be part of it. At the time, she meant it as a threat, a way to force me back into line. But now it sounded like something else. Permission to step out of a system that had defined my role for most of my adult life. Eventually, I did call the lawyer back, not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to understand exactly how serious that situation had become. The conversation lasted about 15 minutes. By the end of it, the picture was very clear. The escrow process had closed automatically. When the authorization deadline passed, the seller had been notified. The contract was technically terminated, however. If all parties agreed quickly, there was a small chance the transaction could still be revived, but it required one thing. My confirmation? The same confirmation I had warned my family about during that argument at the dinner table, the same confirmation that was tied to my name in the system. When the lawyer finished explaining, he paused. So the next step, he said carefully, would be determining whether you're willing to participate in restoring the transaction. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. Cars were still passing on the street. Someone across the road was carrying groceries into their apartment. Building. Life moving forward. Exactly the way my mom said she wanted. Without me. I'll think about it, I said. The lawyer sounded relieved just hearing that much. Please let me know as soon as possible. After the call ended, I sat quietly for a while. Then my phone buzzed again. A message from my mom. Only 2 sentences this time. Sophia, we're sorry. Can we please talk? I read it twice. For most of my life, hearing those words from her would have meant everything. But now, they felt different because apologies that arrive after a disaster often aren't really about regret. They're about damage control still. I knew one thing for sure. Whether I decided to help them or not, the balance of power in our relationship had already changed for the first time. My family needed something from me, and I was the one who got to decide what happened next. Before we end today's story, I'd love to hear from you. If you were in Sophia's position, what would you do? Would you help your family save the deal, or let them deal with the consequences? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. And if this story kept you hooked, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves real life drama stories like this. Your support helps more stories like this reach people around the world. Also, let me know where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Thanks for spending this time with me, and wherever you are tonight. I hope your life is moving forward in a way that truly belongs to you.